Moonwalking with Einstein. This book chronicles the journey of Joshua Foer, who was a journalist, and how he went from being a journalist to actually winning the international competition of memory, the international competition uh, uh, on how you can retain information, on how well you can retain information. And Moonwalking with Einstein is all about how to improve your memory, how to figure out skills, how there are certain specific skills and processes that you can use to improve your memory for something that is important to you, for remembering things that are important to you. Now, of course, Joshua went on to win the international championship of memory. So there's a lot of great information about how to improve our memory. And let's jump into this scenario. Let's take you on this hypothetical journey. Let's take you on this journey, this story. Okay, we are going to suspend our beliefs and judgment at this time and assume you have a time travel machine. You have a time travel machine, and you decide to fly to the moon with Einstein. You and Einstein are now on the moon. You guys have landed on the moon and you guys start walking on the moon. You are moonwalking with Einstein. Moonwalking with Einstein, right? And you guys are walking around and you've been walking for a few hours and it's so easy walking on the moon. There's hardly any gravity. So you keep walking around and you've been walking for a few hours now. You've been enjoying the scenery and you got dropped off from your rocket and you've just been zigzagging your way around and you find yourself suddenly at this crater and you drop the navigation equipment. You lose the navigation equipment. So here you are with Einstein, and the navigation equipment you had is sitting down in a crater which is thousands of meters deep. So there's no way you can get to the navigation equipment. And now Einstein is freaking out. Albert Einstein is freaking out because the genius that he is, the bigger problem is that he doesn't really like to remember stuff. There's an anecdote, there's a story from his life where someone asked Einstein for his number, for his phone number, and Einstein could not remember the phone number. He could not remember his phone number. He said, I don't even try to remember it. I just go up to the directory and look it up. So there's Mr. Einstein, the genius of all times, but he doesn't really have the memory. He doesn't remember the path you took from the spaceship all the way to the place you are right now. And now you are in a situation where you cannot go anywhere, and both you and Einstein are stuck. And you tell Einstein, don't worry, Albert, I got it figured out. I have it all in my memory palace. And Einstein's like, what are you talking about? What's this memory palace? And you're like, don't worry, I can guide us back because I recorded all this information as we were walking from the spaceship to the current location. And Einstein is like, okay, well, I want to see what you mean by that. And you say, okay, here's what we did. Here's what I did. When we were walking, I created a memory palace. I created a palace in my mind where I stored all the information as we came across. So as we came across maybe the mountains or a crater or more hills, I kept on putting that information in. And Einstein's like, what is a memory palace? So you tell Einstein, here's the way a memory palace works. This is something that was used 2,000 years ago. And we use something like that even today. In our conversations, a lot of the times we say when we're trying to recollect something, we say, well, in the first place, there was this. In the first place, there was this person who was doing this, this, and this. So the idea of memory palaces existed for a couple of thousands of years. It started with the Greeks, and what it was simply put, what I did was, and here's you talking to Einstein again. You're telling him how you did it. You say, well, I started looking at the scenery as soon as we stepped out of the spaceship. I started noticing the scenery and I imagined as if we're walking through my living room. So I saw this big mountain with two peaks. And I remember, and that was to our right side, and I remember there's a refrigerator in my living room that stands to my right side. And when I open the refrigerator door, it becomes like two giant mountains. So that's what I did. I associated my refrigerator in my living room with these two mountains to my right side. And then as we kept on walking, I remember seeing a giant crater, and inside the crater there were more craters. And that was to our left side. After maybe an hour of walking, to our left side there was this giant crater. Now the amazing thing about a giant crater is, how do you remember there was this giant crater? What I did was, I know that in my living room to the left side as we walk in is my TV. Now how do I associate the TV to this crater? Yes, the way I associate the TV to this crater is using the idea that the TV is a giant waste of time. The TV is a giant waste of time. It's a crater for my time. So anytime I turn on the TV, I know I'll be wasting a lot of time. That's what the crater represented to me. It was a giant waste of time. That was where the TV was. And now Einstein is impressed. He's like, wow, you remembered all this stuff. And then it's like, you're like, no, wait, even more. So as we walked towards our right, after another hour of walking, there was these mountains. They were really dark mountains. And there were three peaks. And the reason I remember was that because as I walk into my living room, there was to my right side, right across, right past the TV is a sofa, and is my reclining sofa with the black leather reclining sofa, and I thought about how this mountain would just sit as the three peaks would sit on my sofa, and that's the way I realized that that's what. That was the place I put in my memory palace. And Einstein's like, wow, that is amazing. So now we can just track back. We know there is a mountain with three peaks, and then there's a crater, and then there's another mountain with two peaks. And he's like, you remember more? And you say, yes, I remember all the stuff because everything is in my living room, in my memory palace. I have mapped it all out. And so you walk back with Einstein. As you track back using your memory palace, information from your memory palace, you recollect all this information, and you get back to the spaceship. And now Einstein is really impressed, and he says, well, you got to teach me all this stuff. I want to learn, because this is super impressive. Teach me how you do it. And you're like, well, hold on. I want to teach you, but let me get some pen and paper. Let me draw this out for you, because otherwise you'll forget it. And Einstein's like, no, I won't forget it. Like, you're like, yes, you will. Let's draw a mind map. Let's draw a mind map. And Einstein's like, what's a mind map? A mind map is where you start chunking information into deeper and deeper sub-informations, into smaller and smaller sub-informations. So you say, well, the first thing I did when I tried to remember this was, as we talked about, the memory palace. So here it is, a memory palace. That's one node of the mind map. The second node of the mind map is that I chunked this information. Well, there were times when the crater had smaller craters inside of it, when the mountains had three peaks and much more smaller peaks, but I just said, okay, I'll chunk all those mountains in one big giant chunk of mountains, all those craters in one big giant chunk of craters, and all those hills in two giant hills that I saw. So chunking of information is really important, Mr. Einstein, because if you don't chunk information together, then it becomes really hard to remember all this information. So Einstein says, yeah, of course, I know what chunking is. I understand now what you're saying because I do this all the time when I'm thinking about my concepts in physics, when I think of gravitation and when I'm thinking of the stars and all the systems. I have to chunk information. I have to make smaller and smaller chunks of information and then aggregate them up and go to higher and higher levels of chunks. So I see what you're going at. I see what you're coming at with chunking, and I see how you used it for your memory palace. And now he's really impressed. Einstein's like, well, tell me more. What else did you do? And you say, well, another thing I had to do was make sure that the information I took in was all visual. I was not trying to remember the number of steps I took in one direction. I was not trying to remember going left or going right. All I did was take information visually. I looked at the craters, I looked at the mountains, I looked at the hills, and I kept on trying to remember them. And that's the way our brain processes information. The brain is not very good at remembering language. And the reason why it's not good at remembering language is, or remembering or working with language, it's not as efficient at working with language as it is with working with visuals, because when it comes to visuals, our visual sense came way before our sense of language, our sense of cognitive use of language, because we were using pictures for thousands and thousands and thousands of years, and visual memory thousands of years, even before we got to language. Language is a very new construct of the human society. Before that, we were all very visual animals, and that's why the visual part of our brain is one of the most developed parts of our brains. And Einstein is impressed. He's like, yes, I agree with you. I understand what you're saying, because I also visualize ideas. When I'm thinking about stuff, I'm visualizing how the train left the station, and how the clock, one person stopping the clock at one time and one person starting the clock at another time would be different. I imagine, I visualize. So I understand what you're saying. Visual is really important. And then, of course, Einstein, being as impressed as he is, he said, how did you master all this stuff? What was the key to your mastery? Did you do the 10,000 hour rule? And you're like, no, Mr. Einstein, there's a little more than that. The 10,000 hour rule is important, but that's not enough. What you need to do is deep practice. And what the deep practice means is you need to get an awareness of what you're doing in every moment, and constantly trying to improve, constantly trying to change, constantly trying to magnify, constantly trying to tweak the things that are working, that are not working. It takes a lot of awareness, and it takes a lot of cognition to do this practice. I couldn't just have done it by just spending 10,000 hours and not really doing it with a lot of deep awareness and deep practice. And one of the keys to deep practice is that I had to constantly be measuring and improving myself. So I had to create spreadsheets and charts and graphs and monitor my activities, and constantly try to figure out different ways to keep on making my stuff better and better, make my memory better and better. I would create exercises to improve my memory, and then see how good those exercises, the results of those exercises were. And then I would constantly go back and improve on those exercises, tweak on those exercises, track all my daily data, weekly data, monthly data on spreadsheets, chart them on a graph to see where my progress was. And that is what real practice, that is what deep practice is, and that's what allows us to get to mastery. So yes, 10,000 hour rule is real, but there is a lot more to it. So Einstein is really impressed at this point. He's like, okay, well, let me just go quickly over this mind map of yours that you have drawn here, and let me identify for myself so I can remember. And you're like, yes, Mr. Einstein, you're really good about this, because one thing you understand instinctively is, in order for you to remember something, you will have to recall it more than once. You will have to go back to those ideas just a few more times, just so that your memory will take hold. If you just listen to it once, it will not take hold. If you just see me do it once, it will not take hold. But if you go over the ideas again, and if you try to redo those ideas, then you will remember them much better. And Einstein is happy, and at the same time he says, okay, let me explain to you what you have taught me so far. And you're like, of course, let's do this. So he said, the first thing, so Albert Einstein now explains all the memory ideas on the mind map to you, and he says, the first thing you did was create a memory palace. In the memory palace, you identified a place in your home or anywhere else, and you started putting things, you started associating all those things in your home with the landmarks you were finding on the moon. And you're like, yes, absolutely right. The second thing you were doing as you were going along was you were chunking, because you realized that you couldn't take in all the information all the time. You had to chunk it together. When you saw a bunch of mountains, you just put together as one mountain. When you saw a bunch of craters inside a crater and around the craters, you put them as a chunk of craters in this one area. And you're like, yes, absolutely right, Mr. Einstein. I did the chunking as well. And the third thing, of course, you did was you made sure all the information you recorded or thought about was visual. You didn't try to remember all the logical information, all the step-by-step or the left and right things. And you're like, yes. And the way you got all this memory figured out was because you were on a path to mastery through deep practice. And of course, that's true. So now Einstein is really happy that we're back in the spaceship and we've got it all figured out. But before you go, before we end this story, realize that everything that we just talked about was a big story. Now, maybe as you go along in your life, as you go along, a few months later, a few years later, you might forget parts of the story, but you will not forget everything. Now, this story is a part of you. And why are stories so important in our memory? In our memory, stories are episodic. They have a time and place, and they're visual. We can imagine all these things. You can imagine being on the moon with Einstein, the crazy Einstein, the genius Einstein. You can imagine being lost there. You can imagine seeing a crater. You can imagine seeing a mountain. You can imagine seeing the spaceship in the distance. All these things suddenly take hold in your head now, and you start to imagine the time that you now associate all these different memories with a scale of time, the scale of place. You have a temporal memory, you have a location-based memory of all these things. The same doesn't happen if you just try to regurgitate facts, or if you just try to remember all these things just through facts. That does not work very well, because facts have no association. They're just free hanging in our heads. They're just hanging out in our heads without any association with time, with location, with characters, anything like that. And hence, our brains tend to forget. Our brains are really wired for stories. So here you have it. Great book, Moonwalking with Einstein, all about how to remember better, how to improve your memory. Of course, there are a lot more techniques in the book, a lot more technologies in the book as to how to improve your memory.
Hey guys, before you go, I just want to make sure that you're aware that we have a lot more exciting stuff on our website that you can access. For example, you can actually get into the mind maps that I use to create these videos, and these mind maps really help you understand the ideas and actually remember these ideas. So you can get a link to this, for example, this specific mindset, this mind map of the millionaire fast lane, and you can click through all the good stuff, and this will really help you remember. And you can even create a PDF out of all of this. So you know the website, head on over to www.2000books.com. Here it is again. Just want to make sure you're aware. It's www.2000books.com. Make sure you get there, because that's where you can get access to all these amazing mind maps of all these different books. And I also put PDF of the key ideas and exercises and all that stuff. It's a free resource for you guys. I want to make sure you learn all that you can from all the amazing books we have here. So check it out. Okay, talk to you later. Bye-bye.